Hi, I'm Marlo, and at my father's funeral, my stepmother stood up, pointed right at me, and said, "She was never his real daughter," in front of 47 people. Then she pulled out a DNA test. Her son laughed like they'd rehearsed it. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, but I had something they didn't know, something my father left behind, just for me. And when I pressed play, they couldn't look me in the eye again. But before I tell you what was on that recording, tell me this. What time is it where you are right now? And if this happened to you, what would you have done? The air inside the chapel felt colder than the October wind outside. Charleston mornings could carry that kind of damp chill that settled into your bones. But this was different. The silence was too still, too practiced, as if everyone had agreed to breathe quietly for the sake of appearances. I stood near the podium with a folded sheet of paper trembling in my hands. My eulogy for my father, Silas Hollis. I'd written it the night before, after hours of pacing and crying in the kitchen. Now it felt useless, like a script for a play that had been canceled. The smell of lilies mixed with cedar polish made me nauseous. Dad had always liked cedar. Said it reminded him of the old hardware store he built from nothing. I looked at the casket at the front of the room. Mahogany, simple. Exactly what he would have chosen. On top of it sat a bouquet tied with a red ribbon. My ribbon. He used to wrap my birthday gifts with that same color every single year, even when I was too old to care about ribbons. The pastor cleared his throat, and I knew it was my turn. My heels clicked softly as I approached the microphone. My chest hurt, my fingers cold against the paper. I opened my mouth. "Before we continue," Coraline's voice sliced through the quiet. She stood, black lace hat tilted just enough to look theatrical. Every head turned. I froze mid-step. "I think everyone deserves to know," she said, her voice calm, polished. She was never Silas's real daughter. At first, no one moved. Then a low wave of whispers rolled through the pews. "What?" someone gasped. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. Coraline, my father's widow, looked right at me, her painted lips trembling into a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. From the second row, her son Keir leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Guess you're not family after all," he said. A murmur rippled, louder this time. Coraline reached into her purse, pulling out a manila envelope. "We found medical proof," she announced. "A DNA test." I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me. My throat tightened. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard it hurt. The microphone in front of me hissed, and then went silent. The sound cut out completely. For a second, I thought it was broken. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe I was. No one spoke. Even the pastor looked lost. I stared at the casket, the polished wood reflecting my pale face. My lips moved, but no words came out. Coraline placed the envelope on the podium like she was laying down evidence in court. "Silas wanted honesty," she said smoothly. "And I believe he'd want this truth known." Truth. The word twisted inside me. The crowd didn't know what to do. Some looked embarrassed, some curious. A few tried not to meet my eyes. One woman from my father's business board whispered something that sounded like, "Oh, dear Lord." I turned my gaze to the casket again. The red ribbon had loosened, slipping from the bouquet. When Coraline gestured too sharply, it fluttered to the floor. No one noticed. I bent down, picked it up, and quietly tucked it into my coat pocket. The satin felt warm from the sunlight spilling through the stained glass. For a second, I pressed it between my palms. It was the only thing that felt real. When the ceremony ended, people avoided me like I carried a disease. They drifted past, muttering condolences to Coraline, not to me. One of my cousins touched my arm. "You didn't know," she whispered, her eyes darting toward Coraline. I shook my head. No, I didn't. Outside, the sky was heavy with gray clouds. The wind tugged at my coat as I walked down the church steps alone. The parking lot was half empty already. A few cars idled, exhaust rising in soft plumes that smelled like rain. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face didn't feel like mine. For the first time, I whispered. I didn't know whose face I was wearing. My phone buzzed in my purse, texts from coworkers, a voicemail from a neighbor asking about the funeral. I ignored them. I couldn't explain what had just happened without sounding insane. The ribbon lay in my lap, bright against the black fabric of my dress. I ran my thumb across it, remembering the last time I'd seen my father smile, 3 weeks ago before the hospital took him. He'd asked me to promise I'd listen to Mr. Merritt when the time came. I'd nodded, thinking it was about the will. I started the car. In the side mirror, I caught sight of someone standing near the hearse. Mr. Merritt, the lawyer. He wasn't talking to anyone, just watching me. His briefcase hung at his side. Our eyes met through the glass. He mouthed something I couldn't hear, something short, maybe my name, maybe wait. Then he stepped into his car, the silver sedan that always looked too clean, and pulled out of the lot behind me. As I drove down Meeting Street, the red ribbon slipped from my lap and onto the passenger seat. I picked it up again and wound it around my fingers until they hurt. That was the moment I realized my father hadn't left this world quietly, and neither would I. I turned onto Broad Street with no real plan except to drive until I could breathe again. The air in my car felt just as tight as the chapel had, and the red ribbon on my seat kept catching my eye like it had something to say. I rolled down the window for air. That's when I saw it. The same black sedan trailing 3 cars behind. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Probably someone else from the funeral heading home the same way. Charleston isn't that big, after all. But 2 turns later, when I changed lanes without signaling and the sedan still followed, the hairs on my arms stood up. I pulled into the lot of a small coffee shop, tucked between an antique bookstore and a closed florist, hoping the scent of espresso might help anchor me. I parked, turned off the engine, and waited. The sedan slowed, then pulled in behind me. My fingers gripped the door handle, debating whether to stay or run. But before I could act, the driver's door opened and Mr. Merritt stepped out. Same dark suit, same old briefcase that always looked a bit too heavy for him. He approached calmly, nodding once. "Ms. Hollis," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "May I have a moment?" I stayed in the car for a second longer, then opened the door. "You followed me," I said. "I had to." He looked genuinely apologetic. "Your father left something behind, for you, but with instructions, unusual ones." I narrowed my eyes. "More secrets? You know, I've had enough of those for one day." "I understand." He motioned to the shop behind me. "May I buy you a cup of coffee?" We sat in a corner booth. The place was nearly empty, just a college kid at the counter and a couple arguing over biscotti near the back. I wrapped both hands around my cup, still warm, though I hadn't taken a sip. Merritt placed the briefcase on the table, unlatched it slowly, and pulled out a smaller envelope. It was thick, sealed with a red wax stamp. "He asked me to give this to you," Merritt said, pushing it toward me. "But not today, not until 1 week after the funeral." My stomach twisted. "Why? What is it?" "I haven't read it, and he was very specific. Only you, exactly 1 week later, no earlier. He said, not everyone in that room today could be trusted." I stared at him, unsure if I felt anger or relief. "So he knew something?" Merritt hesitated. "He suspected things. I think he hoped you'd find the rest on your own. This is just the beginning." I didn't open it, not yet. Instead, I studied the wax seal. a small H pressed into it, the same one he used to stamp invoices at the store. What does he expect me to do? You'll understand soon, he said. The key came next. Small, brass, a little tarnished, but the weight of it in my palm was unmistakable. I whispered, "This is from the hardware store." He nodded. He kept the office intact, even after he retired. Said there were things better left there than in a will. I drove home in a haze. The coffee sat untouched in my cup holder. My phone buzzed a few times in my bag. Voicemails, probably from relatives pretending to care or neighbors wondering about the obituary. I ignored them. Coraline's words kept looping in my head. Never his real daughter. But the handwriting on the note inside the envelope, the language my father used, "Not all truth fits in a file. Look beneath what they show you." That wasn't the voice of a man disowning me. It sounded more like a man trying to protect me. I stared at the key on the passenger seat for most of the drive. When the sun dipped low and the streetlights flickered on, I found myself parked in front of Hollis Hardware, or what was left of it. The windows were dusty, the inside dark. The faded sign still hung over the door, Hollis and Sons, though I was neither a son nor, apparently, his daughter. I didn't hesitate. I got out, walked to the front, and slid the key into the lock. It turned easily. Inside, it smelled like old cedar and iron filings. Familiar. My footsteps echoed softly on the wood floor. The counter was still cluttered, not with merchandise, but with old ledgers, a jar of screws, and a faded family photo in a cracked frame. Then I saw it, resting on the corner of the counter like it had been waiting. Another red ribbon. It looked just like the one from the casket, curled gently, like someone had placed it there with care. I picked it up slowly, unsure why my hands trembled more now than at the funeral. I tied it around my wrist before I even realized I was doing it. The place was cold, but something in me had warmed, a memory. Dad teaching me to organize nails by size when I was 10. His laugh when I tried to label the drawer pointy bits. He never said much about love, but he showed it in tools and time, in fixing my bike chain without being asked, in sneaking red ribbons into birthday wrappings. I turned toward the back office. The air shifted. As I stepped toward the hallway, a faint click broke the stillness. A motion sensor light flicked on. Someone had been there, recently. I froze, the brass key clenched in one hand, the ribbon snug around my wrist. That night, I realized the past wasn't buried with my father. It was waiting for me to unlock it. I didn't go home right after I left the store. I drove around for nearly an hour, circling blocks I knew by heart, hoping the cool night air would settle something in me. But it didn't. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky had turned an inky black, the kind that swallows headlights. I sat in the car for a long minute, key in the ignition, staring at my porch light. I never turned it on that morning. Now it glared at me like an accusation. I stepped inside, dropped my coat on the back of the couch, and locked the door behind me. The house was too quiet. I thought about turning on the TV, maybe letting some late-night infomercial distract me, but my hand froze over the remote. I couldn't pretend everything was normal. Not now, not with that red ribbon still tied around my wrist, and the key still warm in my pocket. At some point, I made tea, let it steep too long, drank it cold. I watched the clock climb past midnight, and then, without thinking, I grabbed my keys and headed back to the store. Downtown Charleston was empty at that hour. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving slick reflections on the sidewalk and puddles that distorted street lamp halos. Hollis Hardware looked exactly the same. Quiet, still, untouched. I parked a block away, approached on foot. The brass key slid in again with barely a sound. Inside, the same mix of cedar and metal wrapped around me like memory. This was where I learned what honesty smelled like: oil, sawdust, and soap. The kind of place where Dad would whistle while he cleaned the counters and curse softly under his breath when the register jammed. Where I'd sit on the stool behind the counter doing math homework and pretending not to listen to customer gossip. I walked slowly, hand-brushing the edges of aisles where I used to play hide-and-seek with Old Man Tilson's son. My fingers paused over a row of hammers, each one placed just right. I remembered how Dad used to say, "You build it once, you fix it forever." He meant shelves and doors, but he also meant trust. My chest tightened. I could still hear Coraline's voice echoing, cruel and sharp. "You'll never run this place. It's for real heirs." Funny thing was, I never wanted to run it. Not really. But hearing her say it that way, with that look, it rewrote something in me. I turned toward the office. The door was ajar. Dad never left it open. Never. A chill pressed against the back of my neck. I reached for the knob, heart tapping out a nervous rhythm. The brass key fit, but I didn't need it. It clicked open easily. The office was neater than I expected. Desk wiped clean. Shelves lined with binders and faded receipts. A single drawer sat open, just enough to notice. I walked over slowly, pulled it the rest of the way. Inside, a flash drive and a photo. The picture was of me, probably 5 or 6, sitting on Dad's lap with a red bow in my hair. The kind of photo you forget exists until it sucker punches you years later. On the back, in his blocky handwriting, "For when they question who you are." I swallowed hard, then slid the drive into the old desktop under the counter. It wheezed to life, fan buzzing like a tired dog. A folder popped up on screen. Hollis Trust. I clicked. Scans of legal documents, property records, business registrations, and all of them with my name listed beside his. Co-owner, rights holder, successor. Everything Coraline tried to deny in front of 47 people, right there in black and white. Another folder caught my eye. Voss. I double-clicked. Password protected. I stared at it for a moment, fingers hovering above the keyboard, then leaned back. He had known, not just about what they'd try, but who would try it. He was setting breadcrumbs, and I was only just starting to follow the trail. A sound broke the silence. Sharp and deliberate. A thud from the hallway. I moved quickly, turned off the monitor, yanked the drive from the port, and ducked behind the desk. My breath stalled. Footsteps, steady, close. Through the frosted glass of the office door, a shadow moved. Tall, broad-shouldered. The handle twisted but didn't give. Then came a voice. "You shouldn't be here, Marlowe." Keir Voss. He leaned slightly toward the door, eyes squinting through the glass with that same cocky smirk he wore at the funeral. "You think rummaging through old files will change blood?" he said. I didn't move, didn't breathe. He rattled the handle once more, then let go. "Go home," he muttered. "The past won't save you." His footsteps retreated slowly, heels tapping like a metronome. I stayed where I was until I couldn't hear anything but my own pulse. Then I stood, grabbed the flash drive, and locked the office door behind me. I whispered, "No, but maybe it'll bury you." Rain started up again as I drove home. Halfway there, my phone buzzed. I reached for it, expecting a message from someone asking if I was okay. Maybe Merritt checking in. But the number was blocked. No name, just a message. "You're playing with things you don't understand. Stop before it gets worse." Attached was a photo. It was me, standing in the office, taken from behind the glass. Just minutes ago. I slammed on the brakes, heart skipping. Someone had been watching, not just tonight, but likely before. I thought the dead couldn't reach from the grave. I was wrong. Some just use better messengers. The message haunted me. I kept seeing the photo again and again in my mind. Me, backlit by the office lamp, caught like a thief in my own father's world. Sleep didn't come easy that night. When it did, it brought no comfort. Just flashes of Kier's smirk and Coraline's voice, sweet and sharp like broken glass. By morning, the tension still clung to me like smoke. I brewed coffee I didn't drink and stood at the kitchen sink long enough for the cup to go cold in my hand. That's when my phone rang. Aunt Faye. I hadn't heard from her since the funeral. She was one of the few I thought might believe me, or at least believe in me. Her voice was soft, too soft. I thought maybe we should talk, she said. Clear the air. About what? I asked, keeping my tone even. Come to lunch, she said. Coraline's cooking. Kier'll be there. We just want to talk. I should have said no. Every cell in my body screamed it. But something made me agree. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was stupidity, or maybe I just wanted to look those people in the eye and make sure they knew I wasn't going anywhere. By noon, I was pulling into the same driveway I'd played hopscotch in as a girl. The magnolia tree still leaned heavy over the yard, casting its long shadow across the grass. The white porch swing creaked in the breeze. It all looked the same, unchanged, untouched, and yet everything felt colder. Coraline opened the door wearing a gray cardigan and a smile that never reached her eyes. I didn't think you'd come, she said, voice light as air. You wanted a show, didn't you? I replied, stepping past her without waiting for an invite. Inside, the house smelled like pot roast and polished wood. Kier leaned against the staircase rail, arms crossed, lips curled. Aunt Faye sat at the dining table, wringing her napkin like it might confess something if she twisted it hard enough. Coraline motioned toward the table. Sit, Marlowe. We've got something for you. I sat. A folder appeared in Coraline's hands, sleek, thin, too rehearsed. This is the same report from the funeral, she said, sliding it across the table with her perfectly manicured fingers. But I thought you should see it properly, in private. I opened it. DNA results. My name listed beside the word unknown. He pitied you, dear, Coraline cooed. You were charity. I kept my expression blank, but my pulse ticked up. Something about the document felt off. The letterhead logo was blurry, a little skewed, not something a real hospital lab would miss. Where'd this come from? I asked, thumbing the edge. The hospital, she said too fast. I looked at Aunt Faye. Her eyes dropped to her lap. Which hospital? I asked again, louder this time. Coraline's lips tightened. Does it matter? It does if you're building a story around it. Coraline snapped. Enough! You've embarrassed this family. Long enough? Accept it and move on. I looked around the room. Same framed photos I remembered from childhood, except now one was different. The big portrait that used to hang in the hallway, the one with Dad's arm around me and Coraline stiffly perched beside him. Now it was just Coraline, Silas, and Kier. My part had been cropped out, clean as a razor cut. Family portraits lie, I said, standing slowly, but the truth doesn't stay buried forever. That's when Coraline made her mistake. If your father hadn't hidden those papers, none of this would have been necessary, she snapped, voice shaking. The air froze. I stepped closer. What papers? Kier rushed in, grabbing her arm. She doesn't mean anything by that. But she did, and it was too late. Faye cleared her throat, voice thin. Your father told me, before he passed, he said, if anything happens to me, she'll need it. He said it was in the office safe. I turned to her. You knew? I didn't think it was my place, she whispered. I looked at Coraline again, but her face had gone pale. I'll find it, I said. I didn't wait for dessert. The moment I stepped onto the porch, Kier followed. His boots echoed on the wood behind me. "You keep digging," he said, voice low and full of warning. "You'll end up buried like him." I turned, looked him straight in the eyes. "Then you'd better dig fast." Keir stood there long enough to make his threat sting, then turned back toward the house, shoulders stiff, like he still believed he could control the story. I didn't wait to watch him go inside. I headed straight to my car. By the time I reached the old store again, night had swallowed Charleston whole. The storm that had been threatening all afternoon had finally arrived, dragging sheets of rain down over the windshield as if trying to blur the lines between what was real and what wasn't. I parked under the single flickering streetlight a few feet from the front door of Hollis Hardware. I sat there for a moment, engine off, listening to the steady drum of water on the roof. My hand slipped into my coat pocket and closed around the brass key. It was warm from my body heat, small and unassuming, yet heavier than it had any right to be. Inside, the store was dark and quiet. The air held that familiar mix of metal shavings and old pine, still comforting, still sharp. I didn't bother flipping on the overhead lights this time. I used the flashlight on my phone and let it guide me back toward the office. Coraline's words were still ringing in my head. "If your father hadn't hidden those papers..." That was no slip. That was knowledge, which meant I wasn't chasing shadows anymore. I was closing in on something very real, and they were scared. The office looked just like I'd left it, but now every drawer, shelf, and loose floorboard felt like a potential door. I started with the most obvious places, inside the desk drawers, under the rug, behind the row of dusty manuals on the shelf. Nothing. Frustrated, I sat in Dad's old swivel chair and let my eyes roam the room. Then it hit me, something he used to say whenever we'd fix up the back shed. A man's legacy is only as safe as his foundation. I moved to the workbench that stretched along the back wall, the same one where I'd once spent an entire Saturday learning how to sand wood without gouging it. I got down on my knees and tapped along the baseboards, slow and methodical. Solid, hollow. My breath caught. I pressed harder and felt the panel shift. With a quiet creak, a piece of drywall the size of a legal pad loosened from the studs. Behind it, nestled snug in the wall, was a small metal safe. It was old, scratched, but intact. There was no keyhole, just a dial. I stared at it for a long moment, then, almost without thinking, I spun it to the right, left, 15, right, 82, my birthday. The lock clicked open like it had just been waiting for me. Inside the safe, wrapped in a blue cloth, were 3 things. An envelope, thick and yellowing, marked in Dad's handwriting, "To my daughter." A flash drive labeled, "Play if questioned." And a set of legal documents, deed papers, ownership rights, all signed and notarized. My name was there, typed clean across the bottom. Silas Hollis had made me part owner years ago. He hadn't doubted me, not for a second. I sat back on the floor, clutching the envelope to my chest. My heart felt like it had been picked up and put back together, just enough to beat again. And for the first time since the funeral, I cried. But not because I was broken, because he hadn't let me fall. I moved to the desk, plugged the flash drive into the old desktop, and waited. The screen flickered. Then came his voice, low, calm, and unmistakably Dad. "If you're hearing this, Marlo, it means they've done what I feared. Coraline's never understood the meaning of family, only ownership. She wanted control of this store, the house, even your name. I couldn't stop her while I was here, but I could slow her down. I've left you what you'll need. Merritt knows the rest. Trust him, and trust yourself." I sat motionless, letting his words soak into the walls. He knew. He'd known all of it. And still, he'd prepared for me. The tears came again, softer this time. Not because I was hurting, but because I felt seen. Then the phone rang. Not my cell. The old landline mounted to the wall, the one I didn't think even worked anymore. My body stiffened. The room felt smaller somehow. I crossed over slowly, lifted the receiver. Hello? A breath, then a calm voice. Unfamiliar, smooth. Stop digging, Marlo. You don't want to find what's next. Then the line went dead. I stood there, frozen, the dial tone humming in my ear. Something blinked red above the door. I looked up. A security camera. Tiny, hidden in the molding. Watching me. They were watching me. I grabbed the envelope, the flash drive, the documents, everything, and shoved them into my bag. I double-checked the safe, slammed it shut, spun the dial, and sealed the wall panel back into place. It clicked into place like nothing had ever been there. I locked the office door behind me and stepped back into the storm. The wind had picked up, and the rain came in sideways now, stinging against my skin. I didn't bother running to the car. I let it soak through me. But as I reached for the door handle, I saw them. Headlights. A black sedan, parked at the corner, same one from the funeral, same one from the coffee shop. It didn't drive away. It didn't honk. Just sat there, engine running, watching. I started the car, but I didn't drive off. I stared back at them through the windshield, my fingers gripping the wheel tighter with each breath. By then, I knew I wasn't uncovering secrets. I was walking straight into a trap my father built to catch them. Rain hammered the windshield as I drove along the Charleston waterfront road. I held the steering wheel tight, knuckles white, guiltily checking the rearview mirror again and again. Sure enough, there it was. The same black sedan, lurking behind me like a shadow. For a moment I considered pulling over, letting it pass. But something inside me snapped. I tapped the brakes, turned left. It followed, turned right. It followed again, slowed for a yellow light. Still there. My pulse pounded. My heart insisted on louder beats, but I needed my head clear. I whispered, "You want to see how far I'll go? Fine." And I didn't drive home. Instead, I took a sharp turn toward the old marina, a dead end by the docks. The streetlights were dim, the salt air heavy, and the surface of the water rippled under their yellow glow. I parked the car under a flickering lamp, engine running, rain pelting the hood. Mist curled around every boat mast and railing. Behind me, the sedan pulled up, its headlights resting 20 feet away. I opened the door and stepped out, umbrella over my head, envelope and USB clutched in my hand. Water slipped down the back of my coat. Lightning flickered overhead like a signal. "You can stop hiding," I called. My voice echoed across the empty docks. "You've been following me since the funeral." The driver's door opened. I gulped, breath catching. Out stepped Merritt. "You," I said, disbelief trailing in my tone. He lifted his briefcase slowly, rain rolling off his coat. "You weren't supposed to see me tonight," he said, calm, tired. "Your father asked me to watch over the store." "That's a lie. He trusted you." Merritt's eyes softened. He trusted everyone once. I took a shaky breath. "Then why are you following me?" He looked away toward the water. "Because Coraline isn't doing this alone. There are people who want what's in that drive. You walking around with it makes you a target." I glanced at my wrist where the red ribbon still wrapped, faded from rain but intact. Merritt's eyes flicked there. "You still wear that?" he asked. "He gave it to me the day Mom died," I said quietly. He nodded solemnly. "Then listen to me carefully. If you think the drive is safe with you, you're wrong." I stepped forward, voice low but firm. "How would you even know what's on it unless you've already seen it?" Silence. He inhaled. "You had access to the safe." My chest tightened. "Yes." He sighed, eyes dark. "I was the executor of his will. He left instructions." I held back the questions in my mind. "Changed how?" Merritt exhaled. "Coraline found out." Before I could breathe again, his phone buzzed. He glanced down. His face lost color. "They're here." Far ahead, headlights carved through the rain. 2 more cars approaching fast, engines glowing in the mist. They weren't coming to help. Merritt slapped keys into my grasp. "Go! Don't! Go home! Don't go to the police. They won't help you." "Why should I trust you?" I whispered. "Because your father didn't trust anyone else." I dove into his car. We pulled off just as one of the other cars screeched around a bend, tires splaying water behind them, engine roaring. Merritt floored the gas and the rain slapped the windshield hard. As we sped through the storm, my phone buzzed. I silenced it at first, but then I couldn't resist. It was a voicemail alert. From Dad. Timestamp, 2 days before the funeral. My hand trembled when I pressed play. His voice, fragile, distant. "Marlo, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it out. Don't believe the lawyer." My chest slammed in shock. The storm outside couldn't compare to the one roaring inside me. My hands were still trembling when I pulled into the small, half-lit parking lot of a roadside motel outside Charleston. The rain had stopped, leaving the world soaked and silent. The neon sign above the office buzzed like an insect about to die. I parked in the far corner, checked my mirrors twice, then slipped inside room 12 with the envelope and USB pressed tight to my chest. The air conditioner hummed loud enough to feel alive. It was the kind of sound that filled the gaps where thoughts tried to form. I sat on the edge of the bed, opened my phone, and replayed the voicemail again. "Don't believe the lawyer." Dad's tone wasn't scared. It wasn't rushed. It was deliberate, careful, like he knew I'd need those words to anchor me when everything else started slipping. I hit play again. This time I focused on the background. Beneath his voice, faint but clear, was the soft chime of a clock. I knew that sound. My chest tightened. It was the old brass wall clock that hung in his office at home, the one Coraline refused to let me take after he died. That meant he hadn't recorded the message at work, like I'd assumed. He'd recorded it at home, the same house where Coraline lived. The timing mattered. If he was there when he made this message, then whatever happened after wasn't natural. I took a deep breath and spread everything out on the bed. The ownership papers, the USB, the letter he left, the receipts that had been tucked inside the envelope. Most were familiar, a paper trail of a man trying to tie up his life neatly. But one caught my eye, a receipt from Merritt's law firm, dated 3 days before Dad's death. One line item stood out, power of attorney revision. I froze. Dad had changed his will before he died. He'd revoked Coraline's control, which meant she had no legal right to the house, the store, or the estate, unless someone helped her forge the documents afterward. And the only one who could have done that was Merritt. I felt my pulse crawl up my throat as I reached for my phone and dialed the number on the receipt. "Thank you for calling Merritt and Lowe," a woman answered cheerfully. "How may I direct your call?" "This is Marlo Hollis," I said. "I'm calling about a document signed by my father, Silas Hollis." Silence. Just a faint intake of breath. Then, "One moment, please." A few seconds later, another voice came on the line. Male, lower, controlled. "Ms. Hollis," he said quietly, "this line isn't secure. You shouldn't have that document." I straightened. "Who is this?" "A man who made a mistake." "What mistake?" "Trusting the wrong lawyer." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there staring at the phone, heart pounding. The silence in the room felt thick, pressing against my ears. Merritt's firm was compromised. He wasn't just following orders, he was part of them. I scrolled through my call history, noticing all the times he'd checked in during the months before Dad died. Every few days, a quick message. At the time, I thought he was being kind, looking out for Dad. Now I saw it for what it was, monitoring. He'd been keeping tabs on us both. My mind raced back to the black sedan, the funeral humiliation, the hidden safe. None of it was random. Dad had built a failsafe to protect the truth, but Merritt and Coraline had twisted it into a trap. Dad's voice echoed in my head again. "Don't believe the lawyer." I leaned back against the wall, clutching the USB drive between my fingers. The metal felt colder now, heavy, like it was waiting for me to make a choice. "You thought you could erase me," I whispered to the empty room, "but you left fingerprints everywhere." The laptop on the table flickered as I powered it up. I plugged in the USB and held my breath. A folder appeared. For Marlowe, Truth Before the End. My throat tightened. I double-clicked. A video loaded. Dad sat in his study, pale but steady. The same brass clock chimed faintly behind him. His eyes looked tired but sharp, focused on something beyond the camera. "If this reaches you," he began, voice low and deliberate, "it means my lawyer failed to protect you. Merritt wasn't supposed to take the money." I felt the air leave my lungs. He continued, slower now. "Coraline convinced him it was only about the store. She offered him a way out, said I'd already made my peace, but I hadn't. I tried to change everything before it was too late. If you're seeing this, Marlowe, don't go to him. Go to the person I trusted most." He stopped there. The video glitched and the screen went black. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence again, louder than before. I sat perfectly still. My father's calm, measured words carried more weight than any scream could. Merritt hadn't just betrayed him. He'd sold him out. I shut the laptop, the sound sharp in the quiet room. I didn't realize how hard I was breathing until the condensation fogged the computer screen. Then headlights swept across the thin motel curtains. A car door slammed. Voices, low, male, too close. I grabbed the USB, the papers, the envelope, shoved them into my bag. The air felt electric, thick with the sense that everything was about to break open. "Guess the truth's worth killing for," I muttered under my breath. The doorknob rattled, and that's when I realized my father hadn't just left me clues. He'd set a trap. I was standing right in the middle of it. The motel door didn't break open that night. The voices faded, the headlights eventually disappeared, and I sat on the edge of the bed until dawn, with my back against the wall and my father's words still echoing in my head. I didn't sleep. I didn't shower. I barely moved, except to pack the envelope, the drive, and the copy of the real will back into my bag. By the time I stepped out of the motel room, the air had shifted. No more rain, just the heavy, sticky calm that settles in the Lowcountry before everything goes to hell. I didn't go home. I didn't check in with anyone. I drove straight to the church. Same stained glass windows, same wooden pews. But the people sitting in them had different eyes now. At my father's funeral, they were mourners. Today, they were witnesses. I walked through the doors just before the reading of the will. My heels echoed against the marble, each step deliberate. I wore black again, but this time I wasn't grieving. Coraline turned as I entered, dressed like grief itself, face painted with just enough restraint to seem dignified. Keir sat beside her, polished as always. Their smiles were tight, thin. Mr. Merritt stood at the front, flipping through a stack of papers like nothing had changed. "Miss Hollis," he said, voice flat. "I wasn't expecting you." "No," I replied, walking down the aisle without pausing. "You weren't." I sat in the second pew, front and center, the USB drive warm in my hand. I didn't need to say another word. Not yet. Merritt cleared his throat and began. "The estate of Silas Hollis will be divided as follows." His voice droned like a fly in a quiet room. Business holdings, the house, the land. Coraline's marital entitlements. Each word felt like another layer of dirt being thrown on a casket. And to my daughter? Coraline snapped. You mean alleged daughter? A sharp murmur rippled through the crowd. I stood, calm, unshaken. Go ahead, I said. Play the next part. Merritt hesitated. I will then. From my bag, I pulled out the small portable speaker and plugged in the USB. The church fell still. And then, my father's voice filled the space like a resurrection. If you're hearing this, it means my death has questions that my lawyer can't answer truthfully. Coraline, I know what you've done. You forged the tests, manipulated the board, and bought loyalty from those who should have protected my family. But blood isn't about DNA. It's about truth. And I've left enough of it behind to bury every lie you built. The hush in the church deepened into silence. Coraline's smile faltered. Keir stared ahead, but his grip on the pew tightened, knuckles pale. Merritt froze. His name hadn't been spoken, but the implication was loud enough. Gasps echoed from the back rows. Aunt Faye covered her mouth, eyes wide. This is fake, Coraline shouted, voice shaking. I stepped forward. So was your DNA test. Merritt opened his mouth, but I cut him off. Before my father died, he filed paperwork revoking your power of attorney, Mr. Merritt. I have the document, signed and dated. He went still. The room turned against him. You played a game with the dead, I said softly. Now it's your turn to listen. Coraline's voice cracked. You ungrateful brat. Everything he had was mine. No, I said, pulling a folded page from my coat. It was never yours, and you knew that. This, I held up the real will, is the final version, signed in your office, witnessed by your own secretary. But you didn't read the fine print, did you? I read it aloud. Should any individual act in malice toward my daughter, all entitlements under this will are null and void. Silence dropped like a curtain. Then a ripple of disbelief. Some relatives stood, others whispered. A few glared. Coraline looked like a woman unraveling. You think this is over? She screamed. I turned and walked down the aisle, past the pews, past the stained glass, past every secret they thought they'd buried. I know it's over, I said, because he made sure you'd hear the truth. From him, not me. By the time I stepped out of the church, the sun had already dipped behind the moss-covered oaks, casting long shadows across the stone path. The air smelled like wet earth and something else, something final. No one followed me, no one called my name, not even Aunt Faye. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, the silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt earned. 2 weeks passed in a kind of haze, not quite peace, not quite grief. The newspapers ran with headlines they'd been salivating for. Hollis Estate implodes in shocking will reveal, Charleston heiress disinherited by late husband, lawyer resigns amid allegations. Coraline vanished. No tearful statement, no camera-ready denial, just gone. Merritt stepped down before charges could be filed, slipped away like smoke, leaving behind a mess of shredded documents and a reputation no amount of suits could fix. The hardware store, Hollis Hardware, was mine now, fully. On paper, at least, but I hadn't touched it. Not since that night with the safe. I couldn't bring myself to step inside. Not yet. I didn't win. I just stopped losing. That's what I told myself that morning as I drove to the coast before sunrise. The sky was still bruised with the final shades of night when I parked near the bluff. A soft pink stretched across the horizon, coloring the Atlantic in hues too gentle for the damage the world had seen. I walked barefoot down to the waterline, letting the tide roll across my toes and soak the hem of my jeans. I held the pocket watch in my hand, my father's, the same one that ticked in the background of his recording, steady as a heartbeat, stubborn as truth. The ocean made no demands. It didn't ask for anything back. I stood there for a long time before turning inland, past the dunes, toward the small cemetery behind the church. His stone was simple, just the way he'd want it. Silas Hollis, builder, father, believer. I knelt and ran my fingers across his name. The edges of the engraving were already catching moss. From my coat pocket, I pulled out the USB and slid it gently beneath the edge of the stone, beneath the roots of a small violet that had sprouted from the gravel. "You built things that lasted," I whispered, "even the truth." I looked down at my wrist. The red ribbon, frayed and pale now from rain and time, still clung there. I untied it and let the breeze take it for a moment before I caught it again and looped it gently around the violet. "You gave me the strength to stop being polite about pain. It didn't matter if no one else saw it. It was for him." I sat for a while, watching the light move across the gravestones until the bells began to ring from the steeple above. 8 chimes, then silence. I stood, dusted the dirt from my jeans, and walked back to the car. Later that afternoon, I finally returned to the store. The lock clicked open with a hollow groan, and I pushed the door wide, the familiar creak, echoing down the darkened aisles. Dust floated in the sunlight like lazy ghosts. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I walked slowly to the back office, past the nails and hammers and dusty display bins, until I reached the door where it all began. Inside, the room smelled like wood and old paper. On the back wall hung the same framed quote he'd always kept above his desk. "Truth doesn't shout, it outlasts." I reached up and straightened the frame, just a bit off kilter. Then I opened the blinds. Sunlight streamed in. It hit the ribbon at my wrist, and though it was barely more than a scrap of cloth now, it glowed faintly in the light. Less like a scar, more like a reminder. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I just felt real. Maybe Coraline would never face a courtroom. Maybe Merritt would rebuild somewhere else with another name. Maybe Keir would pretend none of it ever happened. But me? I'd stopped needing them to see me. I'd seen myself. That was enough. I walked through the store one last time, touching the worn counters, the shelves he built with his own hands. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. "They thought silence meant surrender," I whispered as I locked the door behind me. But my silence was never empty. I looked up at the sky, faint clouds parting as the last of the morning fog lifted. It was waiting for the right moment to speak.